What can you tell us about today, first of all, and then we'll have a little look towards tomorrow and the one-dayer at Bristol with England and Sri Lanka.
Morning, Henry. I think you've just said optimism is the name of the game at the moment. You can see the skies starting to brighten. We'll see a bit more in the way of sunshine develop. Next few hours looking pretty decent, but what we're then going to start to see is some showers develop as the temperatures rise. It's quite humid, quite muggy out there. Temperatures into the afternoon about 21, 22 degrees. Any time through the afternoon we're going to see those showers develop. The greatest risk time I think is around mid-afternoon for the Worcester area. Now, as we always know, the problem with showers are there's going to be big gaps between them. We're just going to have to hope they slip either side of the ground. But the big concern, I suppose, with those showers, as they develop, they could be quite torrential, and there is the risk of some thunder to go with them as well. But there should be a decent amount of play either side of them, and there is still that optimism that a few showers might just push to the east or west of the ground and hopefully avoid you.
So the message is there's showers around, but we might get lucky. We keep our fingers crossed.
I am keeping my fingers crossed. I'm keeping everything crossed.
And that's not even counting the football this evening. What about tomorrow in Bristol then? That's another game we're keeping an eye on.
Yeah, we've got a similar sort of issue there. I think shower risk is greatest during the morning. I think it could again be a delayed start. Lots of heavy, frequent showers in around Somerset and the Bristol area first thing. The shower risk diminishes a little bit into the afternoon. There'll still be some around, but the sky should open up in between those showers, so there should be a little bit more sunshine. And again, we just have to hope that some of those clusters of showers stay either side of the ground. But that shower risk will be throughout tomorrow, and it's a similar sort of hail, maybe even thunder mix to go with the showers tomorrow too.
Well, we'll be keeping everything crossed. Matt, thank you so much for keeping us up to date. That's Matt Taylor from the BBC Weather Centre with all things meteorological ahead of this third ODI, I should say, and indeed the third ODI between England and Sri Lanka tomorrow. As Alex Hartley waves at an England player who doesn't even pay any attention whatsoever. Good morning to you, Alex Hartley, World Cup winner in 2017.
That was rude. And now she's just looked and waved. There we go. Freya Davis, everybody.
Hello to you, Alex. Hello as well to Isabel Westbury, who's actually just departed, so she'll be back in a moment. But Alex is with me, and we've got, I think, a slightly more encouraging scene than we had maybe a couple of hours ago as we trudged our way through the rain.
We did. We've walked through some showers, didn't we? But the covers have slowly but surely started to come off. And do you know what? I'm squinting a little bit. It's quite bright.
It is quite bright. As Matt was saying, there's a suggestion that things could brighten up quite a lot for the next couple of hours. This is altogether more encouraging than I was expecting.
Oh, absolutely. And considering that Worcester, of all the grounds in the country, probably is the best equipped to deal with water and rain, I'm feeling quite confident.
Yeah, because we have all seen the pictures in the winter of Worcester.
This is an annual occurrence, isn't it? That the team picture for Worcestershire cricket needs to be taken in the one patch of dry in the ground, surrounded by a lake on which you could probably float a boat. So
indeed.
No, Worcester, I'm confident in the ground staff capabilities here. We've got super soppers out. The covers, some of the covers across the square are being dragged off. There's brightness in the sky. I feel that there is cricket in the air, Henry.
Yes, and I didn't think that half an hour ago. I have to be honest, it felt like one of those days, potentially. What have we seen so far in this series? Well, 2 victories for England. England looking pretty dominant in the games that we've seen at Bristol and Taunton. Alex, how do you think the team are feeling, and what will be their expectations ahead of this third match?
I think their expectations will be that India will try and come hard again. You know, we saw their top order. They've got a very powerful opening pair, and then they've got Mithali Raj that everyone seems to bat around. She sort of anchors the India innings when they lose regular wickets. So India are going to come out fighting. They do have a point to prove. They can play 50 over cricket. You know, they are brilliant. They got to that World Cup final back in 2017. They just haven't quite managed for everything to click so far this series.
Yeah, what's gone wrong, for India?
I think sometimes, it's very easy to try and search for things that have gone wrong when actually maybe the most simplest thing to say is that England are probably the better team at the moment all round in terms of their batting, their strike rate, their tempo they go at, the depth that they have down the batting order. When you think that Anya Shrubsole's batting at number 10, and we've seen her already with some very destructive innings both in the Test and in the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy, the variation in bowling that England are able to offer as well. They bowl in twos, in partnerships. You've got the strike bowlers of Brunt and Shrubsole, and then we saw what Cross could do with the ball with her 5 for last week. She's partnering Sciver at the top, then of course spinners, Eccleston. I mean, we were talking about Eccleston at breakfast this morning. it's a matter of course that she gets a 3 for every game, and we hardly even mention it because it's such a regular occurrence. So I think England are probably the better team, especially in England conditions. These are two teams that tend to win at home. India are very strong at home, England are very strong here. And then you could argue, then you could sort of step down a notch and start looking at the approach of the different teams. Now, Mithali Raj is obviously a talking point. She's got back-to-back 50s in these 2 games, but she has a strike rate that doesn't exceed 100 ever. And I think of her 19 ODI 50s against England, fewer than a third of those have come in winning causes. So I think that paints quite an accurate picture. And I think it's the difficulty as an outsider or somebody writing about it, is that I don't think that this is acknowledged as an issue. It's kind of brushed over, or just listening to Shikha Pandey, for example, one of the opening bowlers for India yesterday in the press conference. She basically said that the bowlers need to take on more responsibility. And you think, well, if you're trying to defend a score of just about 200 against an England team who averages 270 in their first innings scores, your bowlers not got a chance, really. So I think it's about identifying the issues from an Indian perspective they need to work with, which I don't think they have yet done, and then going from there. So I fully expect England to win this. I think they're a clinical, efficient team. I think they're very encouraging signs of them going through to the New Zealand series and the Australia series, of course, in the winter. Not that one wants to look too far ahead, because this is international cricket in itself. But I think, yes, England are the stronger team with personnel and their approach currently.
Let's look at the 2 victories we've seen so far. So last Sunday it was Bristol. It was 8 wickets, the margin of victory. England chasing down 202. Those big scores for Tammy, Beaumont on 87 not out, and Nat Sciver on 74 not out. Fast forward a few days to Taunton on Wednesday. England winning by 5 wickets, chasing slightly more runs, 225 for 5. But Alex, this was a very different win in the sense that England were 92 for 4, and then they had to turn to a big partnership between Sophia, Dunkley and Katherine Brunt. Dunkley finishing 73 not out from her first ODI innings. So it was a sort of more, I suppose, gritty win in that in the respect that it wasn't quite so straightforward, but perhaps that's a sign that England have dominance in other areas.
Yeah, I was about to say, it just shows the depth that the England do have in their squad. They can lose quick wickets, but you've still got Sophia Dunkley, who bats 3 for her regional side, and she's coming in at 6. So England have tremendous depth. Katherine Brunt, her birthday yesterday, I don't know how old, I'm going to say 35, but I was
36.
36. So I've done her well there. She'll appreciate that. The veteran of the game. She's got so much experience, and yes, she's an aggressive batter, but she plays the game. She played the game situation so well the other day. So the depth that this England squad have is just there's no comparison between the two sides, because if you get quick wickets against India, you know full well you're going to bowl them out for under 200.
And that's the real issue, isn't it? Is that we know how exciting and potent the openers, the opening batters are for India in Shafali, Verma and Smriti, but it almost takes me back, 10, 15 years ago in women's cricket, where that if you broke the key partnership, then you were in with a very good chance of rolling out from there on in. And I think Harmanpreet Kaur has not been performing with the bat. She's obviously a big name as far as India concerned in the batting department, but against England since the 2017 World Cup just hasn't really been able to escape single figures. And then Mithali Raj, I think England are quite happy for her to stay in the middle. And
I know Harmanpreet Kaur has yet to get a big score on this trip,
but she can.
Yet she can. It's also worth pointing out, in every single innings so far, Mithali Raj has a higher strike rate than Harmanpreet Kaur.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to say, well, Mithali's just holding everyone up. And
I think this is something certainly that if I were Mithali, I'd sort of counter with and say, well, if you didn't have me anchoring the innings and going at my leisurely strike rate, then it would be even more of a capitulation than you're already seeing. So I think, it's difficult as far as India are concerned, because not only do they have the gusto, the strike rate that on level with England, but arguably they haven't got the personnel around that one anchor either.
And I just think Harmanpreet Kaur has always said she's not going to be the next Mithali Raj of this India side and play forever. She's not had a score since 2017, or not had a big score since 2017. She needs to. There's just something not right with that India side, because she's an aggressive player. She plays, one of the most destructive batters in the world, yet it's not happening at the minute. So something isn't quite right in that India dressing room.
I feel at the moment as though they're almost too risk averse. And again, there are parallels here to the end of perhaps Charlotte Edwards' era. I don't think Edwards ever played in a selfish manner whatsoever, but there was a sentiment around the team nearing her retirement that while she grew and she dominated, no other player was able to really be their own person in her shadow or grow in her shadow.
This is a point you were making, Phil Long, our scorer who joins us as well, about the parallels you can make between Edwards and Mithali.
That's right. I mean, they were both at the point of their career where they were most certainly veterans. They played for their countries for a long time, and when Charlotte Edwards was finally removed from the team removed by Mark Robinson, she was still scoring runs. She was still arguably England's best batter. She was producing the runs, and she was taken out of the team because I think, as you'll agree, Mark Robinson believed that she was covering almost for other players. And
that was a risky move. I mean, this was something in which the immediate reaction of a press that perhaps didn't know the nuances of women's cricket at the time, all perhaps that was known was Charlotte Edwards was a giant of the game. The reaction was quite critical, and I think that would possibly be the same with Mithali's omission here if that were to happen. But I think that unless you take those risks, India will always be losing, respectably losing, fine, but losing. Is that okay? If you take a risk, you might have one hell of a capitulation at one point, and they might be all out for 70 odd. But equally, it gives the opportunity for some of those players to actually come off, which they just haven't really had that opportunity yet.
Alex, from your experience within sides and being part of the England setup post Charlotte Edwards leaving, and that was when you really came in, and was there that sense that there was not a sort of sigh of relief, but just that opportunity for the team to perhaps forge its own path and identity just by virtue of the natural change and shift?
Yeah, it was almost like a new generation of cricketer was born, and we had this big thing where let's not fear getting out. There's no fear of failure in this team. Everyone is in this team because they're good enough and they're capable enough to be here, whereas the top order batters don't fear getting out. If your strength is playing up and over the top, over mid-off, and you get caught mid-off, well, that's all right, because you're still playing to your strengths. If you're a sweeper of the ball and you get out sweeping, that's all right, it's your strength. And I think that's what we're not seeing with the India middle order. There's like a massive fear of getting out because they're thinking, well, if Mithali's thinking, if I get out, we're going to crumble. Or Harmanpreet is thinking, if I get out, I'm going to crumble. Therefore, they're not playing their shots and they're not playing free-flowing cricket.
I think that could be reflected to a degree as well with Harmanpreet's innings. Henry, you say that her strike rate's been lower throughout than Mithali, but first of all, I mean, she hasn't got out of single digits.
It's a slightly misleading stat because she's not batted much.
It's a stat nonetheless, but also she's always come in when Mithali's already been in for a little while, and you can almost see it as she walks to the crease, that pressure of, oh dear, the strike rate's dropped, I'd better go and do something. And then there's just these shots that are these lash outs, so to speak, which, well, in the end are detrimental to her and to the team.
I should say here, we were expecting to bring you play in about a minute's time, but that's not going to happen because we've had a lot of rain in Worcester this morning. The good news is the covers are coming off. A pitch inspection at 11:15 should give us a little bit more clarity over when we can see some play. A lot of the England players are doing laps of the outfield, chatting to supporters from a distance and one thing and another. No sign of play at the moment, but it hopefully won't be too long. Alex?
It's Bring Your Dog to Work Day, so we've got Anya Shrubsole's dog and we've got Sophie Eccleston's dog that are both here today, so they've all gone to see the dogs.
What, literally bring your dog to
yeah,
work
they've
day.
brought their dog to work day.
Well, there you go. Things you learn. Phil, I know that you spoke about the Charlotte Edwards comparison and the Mithali Raj comparison. Was there that sudden uptick from England when there was that change in captaincy?
Well, obviously there was a couple of things happened. Mark Robinson came in, so there was the change in coaching. I mean, the one player we have to look at, we've mentioned it numerous times in this series so far, that benefited, I don't know, certainly it was coincidental that from 2016 Tammy Beaumont's figures have been, as we've mentioned, lots and lots, off the chart. She's number one ODI batsman in the world. So maybe the removal of Charlotte Edwards did give a chance for other players to flourish, and maybe if Mithali Raj was to finish her career soon, then there'd be the chance for Indian batters to come through.
Izzy, this is an interesting area, isn't it? Because it feels like with Indian women's cricket, we're at a really interesting juncture where you have at one end of the scale Shafali Verma, who is your archetypal 21st century cricketer, just fearless, aggressive, exciting to watch, and through no fault of her own, a product of the generation before, Mithali Raj, who's, you know, been playing for longer than Shafali Verma's been alive. But until you have a sort of breakaway that allows these new players to come through, flourish, express themselves and forge their own journey, is there the danger that this India side could stagnate at a critical time when, for the good of the women's game, a successful India is necessary to help it grow?
I don't really think I need to add anything to that, because the simple answer is yes. That India could stagnate. India could find themselves 5-10 years behind the Englands, the Australias. If you talk to Charlotte Edwards now about, you know, the nature of her departure, the timing of it as well, I don't think that she will disagree that actually, in terms of the benefits for England women's cricket, it was the right thing to do. They went on to win the World Cup. We've got a new generation here who are playing fearlessly. You look at the England men's team after their 2015 sort of capitulation in the World Cup, and the way in which they came out with a new gusto, with a new approach, a fearless approach. Everybody almost needs to have that moment of disaster, or that point of flux, that risk taking, in order to start again. And I think this is the same for India.
But they're not at a moment of disaster, because she's top scoring.
Well, they're at the moment of disaster as far as their performances are concerned. They have not won that World Cup, the T20 World Cup, the 2017 World Cup. They're going to be soundly beaten here. Okay, not a moment of disaster, but if they want to be world beaters on the world stage, which they have the potential to be, something needs to change.
Are you, as bowlers, Alex, scared of bowling at Mithali Raj?
No, she doesn't take the game away from you. You know, I am happy for Mithali Raj to get 50 off 110 balls, because in 50 over cricket, that's not changing the game. You know, you keep her in and you bowl at everybody else. You know, it's one of those where if somebody got 50 off 110 balls in the England camp, you know full well they are capable of getting 100 off 150 balls. Mithali Raj isn't capable of going at a higher strike rate than she already is, and she doesn't necessarily become a massive threat. Yes, she's scoring runs, but India is still being bowled out for less than 120.
And that's it. I think that there will be occasions when, England could suffer a massive collapse and they'll not reach the total of 200. But 9 times out of 10, these England players they're too good for that to happen.
And they're fearless. Yeah, yes, you know that you might get bowled out for less than 200, but they're all playing fearless cricket. They're playing their shots and they're playing their own games.
We mentioned a moment ago Charlotte Edwards and Mithali Raj. Another thing we need to remember, 12 runs from Mithali today. She'll become the highest all-time scorer in women's international cricket, and obviously that's got to count for something. But for how long that does count for something, you know.
I just think over the last 10 years cricket has changed. Over the last 5 years cricket has changed, and I'm not taking anything away from Mithali Raj's career. She is an unbelievable batter, you know, an unbelievable cricketer, but I think it's just time to move on. Absolutely.
And I think every conversation around the makeup of the India women's team should start from the point that she is an incredible servant to the game. She's achieved more than anybody. I mean, she's come up there with Charlotte Edwards and very few other women in terms of the whole legacy of women's cricket. There's a green-eyed monster on my left shoulder looking at her batting career, but every champion needs to acknowledge that there is a time to go, and whether you want to do it quit when you're winning, or whether it tapers out. And personally, I think that now would be the time to make bold decisions as far as the India camp is concerned.
I wonder if there's a degree to which she thinks, does she want a women's IPL to exist and that to be part of her legacy, playing the first one of those? But I suppose she could still do that even if she wasn't India captain and be a part of that. And arguably, a women's IPL is more likely if the India team is successful on the international scale, and is that more likely to happen without Mithali Raj? And
I mean, I almost think actually that we're at the stage where India women they've been getting to the finals, and you could argue that they've been visible and successful to an extent, and the fact that the IPL hasn't happened, maybe actually we need to have the opposite happen, is that in India almost get, I say shamed, I don't know if that's the right word, but looking at the way in which Australian women's cricket has gone with the BBL, the way in which England women's cricket has gone with the Kia Super League and now the 100, and they are pulling out in
been talking about for years in different countries and all these sort of things.
I think that one thing that is really encouraging is that these conversations are being had in a more public domain than I think we've ever seen before, is that a lot of the mainstream journalists in India, in cricket, who in the past, again, a bit like in England a few years ago, would have known of a few headline acts and known of their names, but wouldn't have watched the women's team play, wouldn't know about the depth, wouldn't know about the domestic structure. But firstly, there are some very good female journalists in India, male journalists covering women's cricket, bigger journalists that cover men's cricket that are now starting to cover women's cricket. The conversations are starting to be had. I mean, I think about a few months ago when the contracts were announced, the BCCI contracts were announced, and it's quite a startling difference between men's and women's, as it is at the moment across the world in cricket. And there was a bit of traction in the press on that when the coach Ramesh Power came back in to coach India women's cricket when his predecessor hadn't outwardly really done anything wrong, or at least hadn't had the opportunity to do anything wrong, because there'd been a pandemic that had meant he had been a coach for a year and a half, but really only half a year because his team hadn't played underneath him, and Power was coming back into an India women's team that he had departed quite acrimoniously 2 years prior, because he had made the audacious move to think about dropping Mithali Raj from the ODI team.
And is this not the crux of everything? That player power and player influence is superseding the ability for change.
So this is I think this is even more complicated question, because the player power of a few individuals, yes. And this is, I think, one of the other big challenges facing Indian cricket, is that India and Pakistan remain the only two major test nations that don't have a players' union or players' representation. So you think about the Professional Cricketers Association in England that represents all of the professional cricketers, whether you be male or female. So since the England women became professional in 2014, they've been the representatives, and now we're seeing the domestic female cricketers also being represented by the PCA. So there's this ability to form collective action and talk in one unified voice about what these players need to perform on and off the field, to have their mental health cared for things that might be unique to females, like having babies, for example, and maternity leave. At the moment, it's only individuals' voices that are heard. There's no unified action, and I think that is a huge issue in terms of progressing Indian women's cricket as a whole, as opposed to a few Indian women cricketers, which it is at present.
We could go through this for hours.
It's a very interesting topic.
It is a very interesting topic, and I know it's something you've written an awful lot about, Izzy. In the meantime, let me tell you that the situation is improving all the time. The ground staff have been busy. All that is left is one small ground sheet, and then the main covers that I think won't be far from being wheeled off in a few minutes' time. So we'll wait to see what happens and bring you news of the pitch inspection in the next 10 minutes or so. Phil, you just pointed the name Amy Jones to me in a lot of numbers that I can't quite make out, so you're going to have to explain.
Amy Jones, 50th ODI for England today, should she appear. We no doubt she will do. Just always interesting to note her performance for England in ODIs when she's worn the big gloves as wicket-keeper and when she hasn't. To date, 28 games as wicket-keeper at an average of 33.66, and when she played as just a batter with Sarah Taylor behind the stumps, she averaged 23.1 from her 19 innings. Also, the strike rate, interesting, as wicket-keeper 87, as non-wicket-keeper 78. So Amy Jones, with those big gloves on, her performance for England has been superb with the bat, and I'm sure as Izzy and will agree.
Alex,
yes. I was going to say Ali. No, I was going to say Ali.
How long have we spent together the last few weeks?
And I was going to say Ali, and I thought, that's not right.
You can call me Al.
Yeah, well, yeah. I was going to go Ali, I thought, yeah. But no, Amy Jones, been fantastic with the bat, let's say, as she's been wicket-keeper, and also fantastic behind the stumps in this series.
She is entirely forgettable, don't worry about it, Phil. Alex, how good is...
I refuse to comment.
Alex, how good and how much credit do you think Amy Jones deserves? Because 50 ODIs is a huge achievement for anyone in any form of cricket.
It is amazing, isn't it? And you often start your career and 50 caps seem so far away, and you think, oh, I'll never get there, and some of us never did.
Well, wait a minute, you still have an England career ahead of you, possibly, so let's not start start, capping things off already.
But Amy Jones, an unbelievable player, and the fact that she's played for England without the gloves and with the gloves just shows how good she is. She's capable of playing as a wicketkeeper and as a batter, and obviously now she's further down the order and she's really made that role her own.
Do we expect 50 will become 75, will become 100, Izzy?
Oh, I think Amy Jones is a superb wicketkeeper and one that was almost a required departure from her predecessor in Sarah Taylor. I think Sarah Taylor obviously was both hugely talented, hugely entertaining and hugely influential as far as England women were concerned, but also in terms of the development of women's cricket at that time. She is a wicketkeeper who is just beautiful to watch when you think about the neat takes behind the stumps, the ridiculous stumpings, the one-handed tumbling catches to her right. We had those lovely 5-second clips that could be extolled across social media and was so important for the development of women's cricket at that time. But she was a flashy cricketer. She was there for those big moments. Whereas Amy Jones is somebody who you almost forget is there. And that, in many respects, is a sign of a really great cricketer, is that it's only when things go wrong that you remember that there is a keeper behind the stumps. And I think extend Amy Jones to Taniya Bhatia in the last match. I thought that the standard of keeping was incredible. Taniya Bhatia is 5'3"? I don't know, not even that. And she was standing up to the stumps with Jhulan Goswami at 6'2", bowling with pace and bounce and taking pretty much everything that came towards her. Both of them had some beautiful catches standing up to seam bowlers behind the stumps, little nicks, and then also stumpings as well. There was it was Shafali Verma, I think, that Amy Jones got out as stumping when Shafali Verma was almost doing the split, but it was quite remarkable. And I think the standard of keeping has developed so that it's not flashy, it's not showy, but it is tremendously effective.
Indeed. And huge credit to Amy Jones. If she does play today, it will be her 50th one-day international. Kat, we're going to change tack slightly because we have in the last hour or so had news of something that we've been expecting for a little while, and that's the Cricket Disciplinary Commission announcing its decision on Ollie Robinson and those historical tweets. Jonathan Agnew, our cricket correspondent, joins us. Agus, what have we learnt this morning?
Morning, Henry. Yes, well, we've now had the statement from the Cricket Discipline Committee on this business with Ollie Robinson. Remember, it was during the Lord's Test match, his debut, the first day of his first Test match, in fact, that these historic tweets came to light. If you remember, they really split opinion at the time. On the one hand, people saying he should never play again, it should be the end of his career for what he wrote as an 18 to 20-year-old. Others on the other end of the spectrum saying it's outrageous that people should be trawling through the social media content of someone of that age and it coming back a decade later to haunt him. So it really did split opinion. Well, essentially what has happened here is that he has been suspended for 8 matches and fined £3,200. Now, 5 of those 8 matches have been themselves suspended for 2 years. And he has already served 3 matches of suspension, so including, of course, the second Test match at Edgbaston, for which he was suspended, and also 2 blast games for Sussex. So, I mean, the long and the short of it is he can play straight away. They talked about the significant mitigation. That he has matured into a very different person who sent what they acknowledged were deeply offensive tweets on social media when he was between 18 and 20. I think they recognise that he personally was going through a pretty difficult stage in his life. If you remember, he was sacked by Yorkshire at the time, not for this, but just a poor record, really, of training and turning. It was a bad attitude, basically. He appeared personally. I think they were impressed by his version, if you like, and demonstrating that he is a different person now to that one then. So that's where he is. I mean, he can play immediately. What's interesting is that they say here that there's a real opportunity, this is just reading from the statement, for Robinson to have a valuable and positive impact upon others inside and outside the cricketing community. And therefore it made a strong recommendation that Robinson participates in all training programmes in both the use of social media and in respect of anti-discrimination as directed by the Professional Cricketers Association over the next 2 years. So he's going to be very much involved, I think, in the education of all young cricketers from wherever they come from, whatever background they come from, to demonstrate that, yes, on the one hand, of course, it's advisable, surely, for people to look at what was said years ago, but also why they might have said it. And that's more the education, and that comments such as made by him at the time were deeply offensive, and that no one really should be making public those sort of comments. So it's a really interesting situation. There'll be people who will say, well, that's outrageous, he should have had the book thrown at him and so on, and there'll be others who will say he shouldn't have been fined and so on. I mean, I don't think it'll change opinion necessarily, but the bottom line is that it has been, I think, a very interesting process for the ECB to I think check more carefully the background of the people they employ, and that includes the players, but also for the players themselves. Social media is a dangerous animal, and it can come back to bite you, and you've got to think very carefully before you tweet. And so that's clearly there's all sorts of strands to this.
What more of the ECB said? 'Cause I know Tom Harrison has been speaking about he was very strong. I mean, I think we were all a little bit sort of taken aback quite how strong he was initially when the story broke, and the initial ECB reaction. Have we had anything more from the ECB in terms of how this is going to play out?
Fairly short, but you're right. I mean, he was very, very strong at the time because it was deeply embarrassing. It was the day that they launched their Unity program, wasn't it? And everyone was there wearing T-shirts and so on, with standing against racism and ageism and just about everything you can think of. There were the players lined up on the first day of this, and then this blows up. So that evening, Tom Harrison, the chief executive, I think was embarrassed, frankly, as well as furious. I mean, he said what you'd expect him to say, really, that Ollie Robinson has acknowledged that while he wrote these things as a young man, they are unacceptable. He's engaged fully in the disciplinary process. He's admitted the charges, received his sanction, and he will participate in